Welcome back, folks, and today we are going to explore the ego map and the money monsters for Enneagram Type 3, which is my favorite type to talk about because I'm talking about myself. And all this content comes from my new book, Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. And it comes out July 8th, 2025, so you can pre-order it now. And also, if you don't know your Enneagram type, as always, you can follow this QR code to the VQ9 Enneagram assessment, which is my personal favorite. So check that out as well. Now let's get right into it. So for type 3, often called the performer, or I call them the race car of egos. And the reason I call them the race car is they're always gunning for that next achievement. They're always looking to cross the finish line first, get in pole position, win the race, get the pat in the head or gold stars, the promotion, the corner office, whatever it is that their chosen profession is that whatever defines success for their chosen profession. And type 3 is what we fear, and we'll get to our core fear, but kind of what it means is we really hate failure. We always want to look good in the eyes of others and win the accolades of whoever we're around. So we're often can be chronic people pleasers if we're not careful, but we're also really good mask changers. So what 3s will do is they will change their persona in a heartbeat in order to match the expectations or needs of the person or group that they are in front of. And the reason why I often call them the race car is because in their goal-oriented they're very goal-oriented, but they're often going so fast towards those goals, they can leave their authentic selves in the dust. Now, we're going to talk first about the sacred wound of type 3, and that's how their psychological umbilical cord got cut when they were in their early childhood. And that psychological umbilical cord got cut by the core negative emotion of sadness, which is what it means is they have internalized it and they've externalized that sadness. And so they have this inner sense of worthlessness that drives them to always perform in order to overcome the sadness they feel about how they perceive themselves, and a certain sadness or grief or shame about how they think others perceive them. So it's like a stereophonic shame or sadness about their identity. And that's what really drives them. It forms the chassis or the basic structure of their ego. And again, the Enneagram tells us, again, your personality has a nature component and a nurture component. So your nature is your DNA and how those express, and those you don't have a lot of control over. But your nurture part, that's the Enneagram. So that's the core structure of your ego defense mechanisms. And so with this internalized and externalized sadness, they then create their greatest fear of being worthless. And then what that fear of worthlessness does is it creates their greatest vice, often called the passion in the Enneagram. And again, I've changed a lot of the terminology from the traditional Enneagram word, how these words are used in order to build a more streamlined, I think, and a little bit more intelligible structure. So then the greatest vice then is deceit for a 3. Now, deceit doesn't mean that we're intentionally liars. It doesn't mean that we're lying all the time. What it means is we're always putting up a different persona in order to impress people. And that masks that we wear, it's a kind of deceit. It's like we have a really hard time letting people see our authentic self, and we have a hard time tapping into it as well. If you're a 3, you've probably been so busy performing and trying to get those accolades. If you haven't taken the time for deep contemplation and self-reflection, there's a strong possibility you don't even know what your authentic self looks like. So it's a real thing for 3s as they mature and as they age to really try to find out what that authentic center is and be able to take those masks off and present themselves in their healthiest expression. Now, all this is in the shadow of your ego, and we're talking about the shadow structure here. And so that deceit, that fear of being worthless, we don't really want to look at that because deceit is obviously a negative thing. And so in order to hide all of this sort of self-deception first and foremost, and this sort of deception of the masks we're wearing towards others, we adopt a primary ego addiction. And the primary ego addiction for the 3 is then going to be vanity. And so when we're engaging in self-promotion, when we're putting our best foot forward is another way of looking at it. It feels good. The vanity is that ego addiction hides the deceit from our conscious mind, and it makes our self-promotion efforts feel like we get a dopamine hit. It feels good when we get out there and sort of vainly achieve whatever it is that we've set our goal, whatever goals we've set our mind on. But the problem with vanity is that when you overdo it, like any addiction, right, you can overdose on it. And so this is the real ironic part of our personality structure. This shadow was designed in order to protect us from the greatest threats or fears in our childhood environment. So the childhood environment for 3 didn't really value our authentic selves, and so we were, again, people-pleasing in a way to meet the expectations of those around us that might have been a critical father figure or mother figure, whatever it is. But the vanity, like if you do too much of it, just like any of our ego addictions for any of the types, when we overuse it, it creates the very thing we were trying to avoid. So what we want to avoid is feeling worthless. But vanity then makes us look like an idiot sometimes when we overextend ourselves, or we've really deceived ourselves first and foremost about what our real skills and capabilities and competencies are. And so then that vanity then makes us kind of look foolish or creates problems for us. And then we then feel worthless when our life kind of either temporarily or in small ways or big ways, it kind of falls apart. So then we have a secondary ego addiction that comes in and unconsciously takes the place of that primary ego addiction and creates what I call your ego stress response. And so for a type 3, it's evasion. And now evasion is the primary ego addiction for type 9, which means we start to look and act more like a type 9 who withdraws and is sort of, tends to have a problem with sloth or really engagement with life. So when we're using our primary ego addiction of vanity, it's like, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And then when that doesn't work, we switch to that evasion. It's like, don't look at me. I don't want you to see me in my grief and my shame, in my anxiety. And so that evasion is like, it combines with the worst vice of deceit. And so we're evading our problems, we're deceiving ourselves about what the problems are, and we're evading the consequences in a sense. We don't want to necessarily look, because success is so important to us. We want to be winners. We want to be validated is what we're looking for. And then the vanity is now we're not getting validated. We're actually getting negative feedback. So we then go to illusion. So the deceit combines with evasion. So we're evading our problems and deceiving ourselves about them. And so that creates illusion or eluding reality, eluding the problems that we've caused. And for me, the way that manifests is like I want to just sit in front of the TV and binge watch, Game of Thrones for days on end while eating ice cream. Or I'll just fall into a funk and have a hard time getting out of bed because I don't want to look at myself and I don't want others to be looking at me when all this shame is coming up about the problems that have been created for my life. And then we'll switch back and forth between that primary and secondary ego addiction. It can happen more times in a day than we as often as we change our mind about what to have for lunch. So we can use these ego addictions in small doses and we can use them in large doses. But generally the secondary ego addiction comes in when when there's a problem that the primary ego addiction either created and more of that isn't going to solve the problem, or there's a problem that the vanity just can't tackle. It's the wrong tool for the moment, and so we pull back into that kind of and then look a bit more like a 9. Okay, so that brings us to the money monsters for a type 3, which are the barrier and the blinger. So if you are money avoidant, meaning you have this anxiety around money that you don't like dealing with it's causing all the stress, so you tend to push money away. You tend to not want to look at your bills, not do your finances, not look very carefully at one of the four. It can occur in any of the four pillars of finance, which I'll review real quickly. And those four pillars of finance are earning, saving, investing, and giving. So earning, saving, investing, and giving. You might be avoidant in one of those areas, or you might be anxious in another. So we can mix and match the anxiety or avoidance, but tend to be more one type or the other, but we can be jumbled in our approach. So that avoidant money monster, I call them the barrier, meaning we bury like an ostrich burying their head in the sand and not wanting to look at it. We don't want to feel the shame, the sadness, the grief that our money problems are creating, so we just don't look at it. We don't want to deal with it. So that's the barrier. On the other side, a bit more common in type 3s is the blinger, meaning we want to look good in the eyes of the world. So we tend to bling out our life and are buying status symbols like nice cars, nice houses, fancy clothes, jewelry, whatever it is that we think is going to other people will want to walk into a room and look good and be validated for how well put together we are in a way. And so it's sort of looking for social approval and acceptance by one way to get social validation is to have a lot of high status symbols. So we're essentially what's the word? I'm missing it. But anyway, we're sort of trying to project this image so that people think, oh, I'm a successful person by the way I look or the status symbols that I have. And the problem is that for a 3, they might not have the real financial stability to afford some of those things. So they bling out their life, and then they maybe not be as focused on the saving, investing, and giving, maybe high earners, but all that money can be going out in purchasing stuff in order to feel good about yourself. So those are the 2 core money monsters for the type 3. And then as we move up this double cone Enneagram, which is this new model I've developed to explain and teach the Enneagram, which I think is a bit more helpful than the circular model that is traditionally used. We've now moved up from, and I've covered this in the other videos on the shadow structure for all types, but we've now moved from unconscious unity in the womb up to conscious separation in midlife, where we now, our ego starts to grow and inflate to the point where it starts to get so strong, it pushes other people away. It even pushes our connection to the sacred or the divine away, and we feel trapped in what I call the dark night of the soul. So the dark night of the soul for a 3 comes when they've really overused, over years and decades, these ego addictions to create this false persona, which ultimately fails to satisfy their deepest longings and needs to feel seen, validated, and connected, because people are validating them for their personas, but all that praise, it doesn't really help. In some way, it's fleeting, it's temporary. You get this dopamine hit from it. It does feel good to achieve something. And there's nothing wrong with those achievements in and of themselves. But because they're based on a false persona, they never really assuage that deepest core fear of worthlessness that 3s struggle with. And then that throws us into that dark night of the soul when all the things we strive for fail to really satisfy us. And now we feel really empty and alone, and the dark night of the soul is a difficult space to be in. But if you allow it, if you can rest in that pain, if you can let it break open your ego, help you let go of some of those ego addictions and be more mindful of them when you're using them, because you're using them unconsciously. So these are unconscious survival mechanisms that help you survive your childhood. And they were necessary and they were good at the time. But now in your adult life, they're causing all kinds of multi-car pileups, fender benders, and all kinds of issues with road rage from the people around you who you may have disappointed, shall we say. Now, if you can rest in that, let that break you open, and now you can try to consciously now move into your enlightenment structure, into your core virtues, and practice them. But before we get there, there's a little trap door. Each type has what I call a faux virtue or a fake virtue. That's good for other types, but maybe not so good for you when used inappropriately. And for type 3, it's assertiveness. When we're being too assertive, again, that doesn't mean assertiveness is bad inherently, but for a 3, it's really easy to latch on to things like, spiritual quotes like, don't hide your light under a bushel. Well, that's true, but that's really talking to type 9s and other types. It's not for a 3. We're always trying to get validation, again, by look at me. It's assertiveness just reinforces that pay attention to me, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at that kind of neediness for approval from others. And so then you want to try to avoid asserting your false personas. Maybe that's the simplest way of putting it. Okay, so now if you can avoid that spiritual trap, we now move to your primary recovery virtue, which is modesty. Modesty for a 3, what that means is an accurate presentation and assessment internally of your real strengths and weaknesses. It's not humility, which is a little bit different. So humility, I'm oversimplifying a little bit, tends to be about tamping your ego down, which you do need to do, but you don't want to push it down so far that you trigger that internal sense of sadness, that internal shame that you feel. So it's finding a middle ground between grandiose, narcissistic self-aggrandizement and then the polar opposite, which we tend to sometimes feel, which is a kind of narcissistic, nihilistic despair. So between narcissism and nihilism, you want to find that modest middle ground about who you really are and be able to, you got to find it inside yourself first, which is really difficult for 3s because we tend to avoid some of that introspection. And so then if you can capture a modest approach, accurately presenting yourself, then that you can open up your secondary recovery virtue, which is faith. Now, by faith, I don't mean belief in a particular doctrine or dogma or set of religious principles, although those can be very helpful in your journey. What it means is you have the faith to take the masks off and be seen for who you really are. But you got to have the modesty to know what that is, and then you have to have the faith to take the masks off to let yourself be truly seen. And when you do that, then we get to your greatest virtue, and which for a type 3 is going to be authenticity. And that's the thing, if we can practice authenticity and really show our true self to the world and to ourselves, that is our greatest virtue, which then begins, because what happens is when you present your authentic self, which is then when you get praise and validation for your authentic self, that's what will heal that greatest fear of being worthless, because you're getting the connection you're looking for, you're getting the validation you're looking for who you really are. And then that begins to heal your sacred wound. It begins to heal that internalized and externalized sadness about how we feel about ourselves or how we think others perceive us. And when you do that, it brings about it fulfills your greatest hope. And the greatest hope for a 3 is the opposite of their greatest fear. So they finally begin to feel completely valued. And you're not only just shown, and this is where it gets a little tricky, because when you find that authenticity in yourself, it's really about seeing yourself as a fractal piece of the divine, seeing that eternal essence inside yourself that is always worthy, no matter what you do, no matter what happens in your life. You succeed, you fail, you have this grounded knowing that you are loved as a beloved child of the divine. And you find that love and that acceptance inside yourself, and that's what really overcomes that deep sense of worthlessness and heals that sacred wound. And then you get to when that happens, here's the cool part, you get to unlock your sacred gift. And a sacred gift for a type 3 is divine purpose. So, and what I mean by that is you begin to see the value of yourself, the eternal value that you have in the grand cosmic scheme of things, but you also gain the ability to see the inherent worth in everyone and in everything around you, and can help others reveal their purpose, their why. Why are you here? What's your purpose in life? And what's your, that deep knowing that everything is worthy on the cosmic level. And then you become the money master, what I call the builder. You're still always going to be goal oriented. You're always, I think, going to be, looking to achieve something, but now you're building something in service to something higher than yourself. You're healing the crack in the world that you were uniquely born to fix. And all the money that you now have, if you've mastered the art of earning, saving, investing, and giving, you have a solid financial foundation for you, for yourself, for the people you love and care about, and can work out in sort of concentric circles of responsibility and take more responsibility for the suffering that you see in the world around you. And the money you have now becomes this great tool in your superhero tool belt that you can deploy as needed to build something for others. And so you've moved from in the shadow, you were trying to establish your independence, but now we're establishing your interdependence in the second half of life, moving you all the way up to the top of the double cone Enneagram, which would be conscious unity. You now understand that you are intrinsically connected to everyone and everything in love and able to serve the world with all the great talents that you have. So that's a quick outline for the ego map for type 3. If you like these videos, please remember to share, like, and subscribe. And if you want more information and more depth on this, check out my new book, Taming Your Money Monsters, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. Thanks, gang. Talk soon.